The horizon always appears perfectly flat 360 degrees around the observer regardless of altitude. All amateur balloon, rocket, plane, and drone footage show a completely flat horizon over 20+ miles high. Only NASA and other government space agencies show curvature in their fake CGI photos and videos. 2. The horizon always rises to the eye level of the observer as altitude is gained, so you never have to look down to see it. If Earth were in fact a globe, no matter how large, as you ascended, the horizon would stay fixed and the observer would have to tilt looking down further and further to see it. 3. The natural physics of water is to find and maintain its level. If Earth were a giant sphere tilted, wobbling, and hurtling through infinite space, then truly flat, consistently level surfaces would not exist here. But since Earth is in fact an extended flat plane, this fundamental physical property of fluids finding and remaining level is consistent with experience and common sense. 4. Rivers run down to sea level, finding the easiest course, north, south, east, west, and all other intermediary directions over the Earth at the same time. If Earth were truly a spinning ball, then many of these rivers would be impossibly flowing uphill. For example, the Mississippi, in its 3,000 miles, would have to ascend 11 miles before reaching the Gulf of Mexico. 5. One portion of the Nile River flows for 1,000 miles with a fall of only 1 foot. Parts of the West African Congo, according to the supposed inclination and movement of the ball Earth, would be sometimes running uphill and sometimes down. This would also be the case for the Parana, Paraguay, and other long rivers. 6. If Earth were a ball 25,000 miles in circumference, as NASA and modern astronomy claim, spherical trigonometry dictates the surface of all standing water must curve downward an easily measurable 8 inches per mile, multiplied by the square of the distance. This means, along a 6-mile channel of standing water, the Earth would dip 6 feet on either end from the central peak. Every time such experiments have been conducted, however, standing water has proven to be perfectly level. 7. Surveyors, engineers, and architects are never required to factor the supposed curvature of the Earth into their projects. Canals, railways, bridges, and tunnels, for example, are always cut and laid horizontally, often over hundreds of miles without any allowance for curvature. 8. The Suez Canal, connecting the Mediterranean with the Red Sea, is 100 miles long without any locks, making the water an uninterrupted continuation of the two seas. When constructed, the Earth's supposed curvature was not taken into account. It was dug along a horizontal datum line, 26 feet below sea level, passing through several lakes from one sea to the other, with the datum line and the water's surface running perfectly parallel over the 100 miles. 9. Engineer W. Winkler was published in the Earth Review regarding the Earth's supposed curvature, stating, "As an engineer of many years' standing, I saw that this absurd allowance is only permitted in school books. No engineer would dream of allowing anything of the kind. I have projected many miles of railways and many more of canals, and the allowance has not even been thought of, much less allowed for. This allowance for curvature means this, that it is 8 inches for the first mile of a canal and increasing at the ratio by the square of the distance in miles. Thus a small navigable canal for boats, say 30 miles long, will have, by the above rule, an allowance for curvature of 600 feet. Think of that, and then please credit engineers as not being quite such fools. Nothing of the sort is allowed. We no more think of allowing 600 feet for a line of 30 miles of railway or canal than of wasting our time trying to square the circle. 10. The London and Northwestern Railway forms a straight line 180 miles long between London and Liverpool. The railroad's highest point, midway at Birmingham Station, is only 240 feet above sea level. If the world were actually a globe, however, curving 8 inches per mile squared, the 180-mile stretch of rail would form an arc with the center point at Birmingham raised over a mile, a full 5,400 feet above London and Liverpool. 11. A surveyor and engineer of 30 years published in the Birmingham Weekly Mercury stated, "I am thoroughly acquainted with the theory and practice of civil engineering. However bigoted some of our professors may be in the theory of surveying, according to the prescribed rules, Yet it is well known amongst us that such theoretical measurements are incapable of any practical illustration. All our locomotives are designed to run on what may be regarded as true levels, or flats. There are, of course, partial inclines or gradients here and there, but they are always accurately defined and must be carefully traversed. But anything approaching to 8 inches in the mile, increasing as the square of the distance, could not be worked by any engine that was ever yet constructed. Taking one station with another, all over England and Scotland, it may be stated that all the platforms are on the same relative level. The distance between eastern and western coasts of England may be set down as 300 miles. If the prescribed curvature was indeed as represented, the central stations at Rugby or Warwick ought to be close upon 3 miles higher than a cord drawn from the two extremities. If such was the case, there is not a driver or stoker within the kingdom that would be found to take charge of the train. We can only laugh at those of your readers who seriously give us credit for such venturesome exploits as running trains round spherical curves. Horizontal curves on levels are dangerous enough. Vertical curves would be 1,000 times worse, and with our rolling stock constructed as at present, physically impossible. 12. The Manchester Ship Canal Company, published in the Earth Review, stated, "It is customary in railway and canal constructions for all levels to be referred to a datum which is nominally horizontal, and is so shown on all sections. It is not the practice in laying out public works to make allowances for the curvature of the earth." 13. In a 19th century French experiment by M.M. and Arago, a powerful lamp with good reflectors was placed on the summit of Desierto las Palmas in Spain, and able to be seen all the way from Capri on the island of Ibiza. Since the elevation of the 2 points were identical, and the distance between covered nearly 100 miles, if the earth were a ball 25,000 miles in circumference, the light should have been more than 6,600 feet, a mile and a quarter, below the line of sight. 14. The Lieutenant Colonel Portlock experiment used oxyhydrogen Drummond's lights and heliostats to reflect the sun's rays across stations set up across 108 miles of St. George's Channel. If the earth were actually a ball 25,000 miles in circumference, Portlock's light should have remained hidden under a mile and a half of curvature. 15. If the earth were truly a sphere 25,000 miles in circumference, airplane pilots would have to constantly correct their altitudes downwards so as to not fly straight off into outer space. A pilot wishing to simply maintain their altitude at a typical cruising speed of 500 miles per hour would have to constantly dip their nose downwards and descend 2,777 feet, over half a mile, every minute. Otherwise, without compensation, in 1 hour's time, the pilot would find themselves 31.5 miles higher than expected. 16. The experiment known as Airy's failure proved that stars move relative to a stationary Earth and not the other way around. By first filling a telescope with water to slow down the speed of light inside, then calculating the tilt necessary to get the starlight directly down the tube, Airy failed to prove the heliocentric theory, since the starlight was already coming in the correct angle with no change necessary, and instead proved the geocentric model correct. 17. Olber's paradox states that if there were billions of stars, which are suns, the night sky would be filled completely with light. As Edgar Allan Poe said, "Were the succession of stars endless, then the background of the sky would present us a uniform luminosity, since there could exist absolutely no point in all that background at which would not exist a star." In fact, Olber's paradox is no more a paradox than George Airy's experiment was a failure. Both are actually excellent refutations of the heliocentric spinning ball Earth model. 18. The Michelson, Morley, and Sagnac experiments attempted to measure the change in speed of light due to Earth's assumed motion through space. After measuring in every possible different direction in various locations, they failed to detect any significant change whatsoever, again proving the stationary geocentric model. 19. Tycho Brahe famously argued against the heliocentric theory in his time, positing that if the Earth revolved around the Sun, the change in relative position of the stars after 6 months' orbital motion could not fail to be seen. He argued that the stars should seem to separate as we approach and come together as we recede. In actual fact, however, after 190 million miles of supposed orbit around the Sun, not a single inch of parallax can be detected in the stars, proving that we have not moved at all. 20. If Earth were truly constantly spinning eastwards at over 1,000 miles per hour, vertically fired cannonballs and other projectiles should fall significantly due west. In actual fact, however, when this has been tested, vertically fired cannonballs shoot upwards an average of 14 seconds ascending, 14 seconds descending, and fall back to the ground no more than 2 feet away from the cannon, often directly back into the muzzle. 21. If the Earth were truly constantly spinning eastward at over 1,000 miles per hour, helicopters and hot air balloons should be able to simply hover over the surface of the Earth and wait for their destinations to come to them. 22. If Earth were truly constantly spinning eastward at over 1,000 miles per hour, during the Red Bull stratosphere dive, Felix Baumgartner, spending 3 hours ascending over New Mexico, should have landed 2,500 miles west into the Pacific Ocean, but instead landed a few dozen miles east of the takeoff point. 23. Ball believers often claim gravity magically and inexplicably drags the entire lower atmosphere of the Earth in perfect synchronization up to some undetermined height, where this progressively faster spinning atmosphere gives way to the non-spinning, non-gravitized, non-atmosphere of infinite vacuum space. Such nonsensical theories are debunked, however, by rain, fireworks, birds, bugs, clouds, smoke, planes, and projectiles, all of which would behave very differently if both the ball Earth and its atmosphere were constantly spinning eastward at 1,000 miles per hour. 24. If Earth and its atmosphere were constantly spinning eastward over 1,000 miles per hour, then north-south facing cannons should establish a control, while east-firing cannonballs should fall significantly farther than all others, while west-firing cannonballs should fall significantly closer. In actual fact, however, regardless of which direction cannons are fired, the distance covered is always the same.